The Sunday Times has learned about the defence investment plan that we are expecting to be published on Tuesday, and we hear that Andy Burnham has signed off on a deal that won't replace the ageing fleet of frigates and destroyers that we have and instead divert cash into new tech. Well, here to tell us more is Simon Kelly, retired Royal Navy Commodore, Defence and Security Consultant. Simon, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie.
So for what we know at this point, there seems to be a sort of reprioritisation to say, actually, we're not going to restore or replace this ageing fleet. Drones is where we should be investing. What do you think about this recategorisation, this reprioritisation?
I think I'd start by saying, if I'm honest, I'm reeling slightly, because this announcement, the Defence Investment Plan, is, I think, and the naval historians will correct me if I'm wrong, this is the first time that we will see this level of investment where we're not seeing a replacement of what we'd call traditional surface platforms. Now, we still have the Type 26 program, which will replace our aging Type 23s. We've got Type 31. So there are still ships in the hoist, so to speak. But what we're talking about here is that by the end of the 2030s, the Type 45 destroyers that form an air defence barrier around an aircraft carrier, or recently have been protecting Cyprus, will not be replaced. And really interestingly, for a plan which really boosts autonomy, drones, and the rest of it, there was a plan to build 5 Type 32s and loads of different numbers here. But
Simon, can I ask, because I think if you're not familiar in this world, I can't picture a Type 45 from a Type 32. Yeah. So could you sort of explain in real terms what these different vessels do and why they're important?
Yeah. So the Type 45 is an anti-air capability. It sits around an aircraft carrier, and it protects against the sort of things we're seeing in the Gulf at the moment, the drones, the missiles that come in. It provides that sort of defense around something like an aircraft carrier, Cyprus most recently, or the UK, should it come, or areas of the UK, should it come under attack. So that's the thing they're not going to replace in the late 2030s under the sort of initial information we're getting from the leaks. The Type 32 is a really interesting one, because this concept is part of what the Navy's calling the hybrid Navy. And that was going to be the brain, the ship that was going to sit at the centre of all of these drones that were going to be built. And it would control those drones as a replacement to traditionally crewed platforms. It's really interesting that they've got rid of this idea of a Type 32, which was like a command platform. So I must admit, I'm reeling slightly. We need to see what the whole plan looks like before we really start sort of analysing it. And I know what's going to happen is people are going to say, well, we've got the war in Ukraine. We're not Ukraine. We are an island nation. I know we trot that out in the Navy an awful lot, but we're surrounded by water. We've got the North Atlantic all the way up to the Arctic. We're not a nation like Ukraine. We're not like the Iranians with the Straits of Hormuz. We've got such a global reach with our Royal Navy.
But how would you define the current status of our Navy in terms of its health and its sort of tenacity?
Yeah, I think it's been underinvested in. Admiral Radican today in the Times has been talking about the fact that we shouldn't be embarrassed about the fact that there was a peace dividend. We underinvested in the Navy at a time where that wasn't necessarily seen as a priority. And I think this is where so Air Vice Marshal Sir Richard Knighton, Chief of Defence Staff, sat in front of the Defence Select Committee, and he talked about the budget as a whole. And what he said is, if we cut the money, if we don't give us the full budget, I have to cut day-to-day activities. What does that mean? It means that the fleet that we've got at the moment, which is already struggling because it doesn't have the parts, it's not going out and training regularly enough, it will continue to degrade. And so that's what we're saying, is that at the moment, the fleet that we've got, the units that we've got aren't out, they're not exercising enough, they don't have the spares to get to sea on a regular basis. All of this is worsened by an underinvestment in defence. And of course, what we need to do is maintain that while we pivot into this new sort of world, new vision of drones and autonomy. And it's going to take a mind shift for everyone.
And the Times reports, the defence correspondent of the Sunday Times, who we'll be speaking to a little bit later, he says the UK is now facing a frigate gap where antiquated warships are being decommissioned before their replacements become available. I mean, what risk profile does that pose, do you think?
I think unless the autonomous systems can be brought online, and much of the technology is untested, unless they can be brought online, we will see gaps in capability. The Type 23, which is our anti-submarine warfare frigate, is going to be replaced by a Type 26. They're in build at the moment, but there will be a gap. The 23s are aging, they're being decommissioned. So yeah, it's going to leave us capabilities gap in the North Atlantic, our ability to protect ourselves from the Russians that are increasingly aggressive around the UK and UK sensitive waters. So it's going to take a shift, because what we're going to need to do is stop with a sort of antiquated procurement process that looks at a program over 20 years. And we're going to need to start buying systems that we're going to learn to use really quickly and get rid of to replace with new systems as they develop. That's what the Ukrainians have done. They're constantly changing, iterating, developing on the battlefield. We're going to have to do that in peace, and that's going to cost money, it's going to take time, and it's going to take a real mind shift.
And a little bit later we'll look at politically why that's often quite a hard case to make. Simon, part of what's happened in Ukraine, I think, has shifted priorities here. The idea being that drones, autonomous uncrewed vehicles are sort of very adept at tackling the subsea threat. You know, we've talked often about the kind of undersea cables and things. How concrete a replacement are they?
There has been some incredible developments there. So the drones that we can now launch into the sea, into the North Atlantic and the high north, have incredible endurance. They can, to a certain extent, replace frigates who go out there, and they'll go out there sporadically, whereas you can put a drone into the water, you can put sensors on it, and it can be there for a very long time in all sorts of weathers and all sorts of conditions. So the technology really is moving on, as we are absolutely at the cutting edge of that technology. Whether it can replace the sort of system that a ship with drones represents is different. The technology is great, the drones are brilliant, but ultimately it's the crew behind them, it's the thinking behind them that's really important. And so you can't develop one without developing the other.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of other things. This actually is a defence investment plan that has had a bit of a budget boost by quite some margin. Dan Jarvis, the new Defence Secretary, supposedly found another £1 to £1.5 billion. And yet the case has been made to shift where things are being spent. How frustrated are you about the sort of political consequence of all of this? And, you know, the original budget that was set out from the Strategic Defence Review was 28 billion. We are still, 10 billion short of that.
I'm really frustrated. There are small things that some may not notice, like they've delayed investment in housing for our armed forces, and investment in that affects families, that affects people. That really frustrates me. It frustrates me that I suspect that we'll be cutting the day-to-day training and maintenance budget in order to make this change. And that's really going to affect people's lives. It's going to affect our capability today, our ability to fight tonight, which is what the country demands.
What are your former colleagues, saying about Andy Burnham and what you think he knows about defence and the Navy?
I haven't heard a great deal. I think what saddens me slightly about the headline that Burnham has signed this off is what we're missing here is the opportunity to hear the debate about exactly where he stands. It feels like a convenient response to say, yeah, I've seen it, I've signed it off, it can go forward to the NATO meeting in July, and he can start his job without having to worry about the numbers of a defence investment plan, and his new Chancellor won't do that. Al Khan's, the outgoing Armed Forces Minister, has been vociferous in terms of we need to have a debate about where we are as a country, where are we in 20 years' time. I think we might miss that, and I'm saddened by that.
Thank you so much for your time. Simon Kelly, the maritime strategist, former Royal Navy commander. It's been brilliant to have, a very comprehensive explanation of what exactly these vessels are, what will and won't be spent on.
Yeah, I was just looking through some of the comments there on the Times Online this morning. E. Murphy says, I think Labour has misinterpreted the meaning of stop the boats. And that is one of the takeaways actually from this, is the scrapping of plans to replace ageing destroyers and frigates in favour of funding drones. I suppose the flip side to that is, which war are we preparing for? You've got to prepare for the next one. What is that going to look like? And later on we'll speak to Dominic Housechild, who is the Sunday Times defence correspondent, who has written this article today. He will draw comparisons for us with Ukraine's sort of drone divisions and how they are working right now in an actual active combat, and what we've kind of learned from them, and therefore whether this approach to prioritise drones, it would seem, is in fact the correct one to modernise the armed forces.
There's sort of two stories happening at once. One is, what do we actually need to defend the country? And second of all of the political ramifications of this, because it has taken months and months and months of wrangling. John Healey resigns, which really was sort of the final nail in the coffin for Keir Starmer, and you think now he passes over to someone else who's just going to green light it, or not, or say it's fine for now and a few weeks in want to revise it with the new Chancellor. Of course, we don't know who that is. It is quite a surprising situation to find ourselves in, that the decision makers at this point, we don't actually know who they are.
Yeah, that's so true. This kind of lame duck few weeks for Starmer continues, but he will be out on Tuesday, we expect, to announce this defence investment plan.